Security, why is there a janitor standing in my boardroom? Daniel Whitmore's voice cut through the glass-walled silence before Marcus even reached the end of the 12-foot table. A few executives chuckling under their breath as laptops clicked shut and polished shoes shifted against the marble floor. Marcus paused with his worn toolbox still in hand, the faint hum of the overhead projector reflecting off the chrome edges around him. And for a second, no one noticed how his eyes moved. Not nervous, not lost, but scanning the financial slide frozen mid-presentation like he'd seen something the rest of them hadn't. Something small, buried, dangerous, the kind of mistake that doesn't show up until it costs millions. But Daniel had already turned away, dismissing him with a flick of his hand, already making the decision that would almost ruin everything. Marcus did not move right away, not because he was unsure, but because he had learned a long time ago that men like Daniel Whitmore did not really see him, not beyond the uniform, not beyond the quiet way he carried himself through hallways that smelled like polish and expensive coffee, 12 floors above a world he used to belong to. He set his toolbox down beside the wall like he had been told, shoulders relaxed, eyes lowered just enough to make everyone comfortable, while a few executives avoided looking at him altogether and others stared too long, the kind of stare that turned a person into background noise, into something temporary, replaceable, forgettable. Earlier that morning, he had clocked in at 6:30, rode the service elevator alone, and listened to the building wake up floor by floor, unaware that the same system now glowing on that screen had once been his responsibility, his design, his late nights and early mornings, until one decision from someone like Daniel had erased his name from it completely, and now he stood there again, invisible in plain sight, watching the numbers shift in real time, feeling that same quiet pressure in his chest, the kind that only came when something was about to go very, very wrong. Daniel did not even glance back when Marcus shifted his weight, his attention fixed on the glowing projection as he spoke with that effortless authority that filled the room. Let us keep this efficient, people. We are not here to babysit maintenance staff. A few low laughs rippled across the table, sharper this time, more comfortable, as if permission had been granted. One executive leaned back in his chair and muttered just loud enough, "He probably cannot even read half of this," and another added, "Just stand still and try not to break anything," drawing a wider reaction, shoulders shaking, eyes avoiding Marcus while still feeding off the moment. Marcus remained where he was, hands loosely at his sides, the faint reflection of the screen flickering across his face, but inside, the numbers on that slide kept rearranging themselves in his mind, each line connecting to a risk no one else seemed to notice. Daniel tapped the table with a pen, impatience creeping into his tone. "Security," I said, "handle it." And now the attention fully turned toward Marcus, not as a person, but as a problem to be removed. A distraction in a room that believed it already knew everything it needed to know, moments away from proving just how wrong that belief really was. The guard at the door hesitated for half a second, just enough for the tension to stretch thin across the room like glass about to crack, and Marcus felt every eye settle on him with a quiet expectation that he would comply, that he would lower his head, pick up his toolbox, and disappear without a word like he was supposed to. Daniel exhaled sharply, tapping his pen again, louder this time. "We are losing time. Remove him." His voice no longer amused, now edged with irritation, the kind that did not tolerate resistance. Marcus bent slightly to lift his toolbox, fingers brushing against the worn handle. But his gaze flickered once more to the screen, to the column of numbers that had just updated, and something shifted in his expression, subtle but unshakable. He straightened, not fully turning toward Daniel, but enough that his voice, when it came, carried across the room without force. "That projection is off." The words landed softly, but the effect was immediate. A few people blinked. One man let out a short laugh like it had to be a joke. Another whispered, "Did he just speak?" And Daniel's pen froze mid-tap. The guard paused again, unsure now, caught between orders and confusion, while Marcus continued, steady, measured. "If you run that model another quarter, the loss compounds past 20 million. A sharper reaction rippled through the table, heads turning toward the screen, then back to him, disbelief mixing with annoyance, and Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, the room no longer laughing, but not yet willing to believe, suspended in that fragile moment where everything could still be dismissed as nonsense or become something far more dangerous. Daniel's jaw tightened as he leaned forward, fingers pressing flat against the polished table, eyes locked on Marcus now with something sharper than irritation, something closer to challenge. "You are out of line," he said quietly, the room holding its breath as if waiting for permission to react. And then, just before the guard could step in again, Marcus met his gaze fully for the first time, steady, unflinching. "Are you sure you want to do that?" The question did not rise in volume, but it landed heavier than anything else that had been said, a few heads turning quickly between them, confusion flickering into concern, because it was not defiance they heard, it was certainty, and that was different. Daniel's hand hovered over the table, pen still between his fingers, and for a fraction of a second, he did not speak, did not move, as if something unseen had interrupted the rhythm he controlled so easily. And that was when the room felt it too. The shift, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a crack spreads through glass. No one laughed this time. Not when Marcus spoke again. Not when he stepped half a pace closer to the screen like he belonged there. His voice still calm, still measured. "The error is not in the projection itself. It is in the assumption feeding it." A few executives exchanged uneasy looks, one of them quickly pulling the report closer, scrolling, checking, fingers moving faster now, less confident. Daniel said nothing, but his eyes flicked to the numbers, then back to Marcus, as if trying to place something that did not fit, something familiar buried under years of dismissal. Marcus lifted his hand slightly, not pointing, just indicating the section. Line 12. The rollover rate is locked to last quarter stability, but the market shifted 3 weeks ago. A pause, a longer one now, the kind that stretched tight across the room as the analyst at the far end leaned forward, zooming in, breath catching just enough to be heard. "Wait," he muttered, almost to himself. "That cannot be right." But it was. The data was updating, recalculating, and the margin on the side began to bleed red, slow at first, then faster. Daniel's grip on the pen tightened, the faint tapping gone now, replaced by stillness. And something in his expression changed, not fully, not yet, but enough that the confidence no longer looked untouchable. Marcus did not raise his voice, did not press further. He simply stood there, watching the realization begin to form in pieces, across the faces around the table, like a memory returning too late, while the screen continued to shift, exposing more than just a flawed model, exposing a decision, a signature, a moment in the past where someone had chosen speed over scrutiny, and now that choice was unfolding in real time, impossible to ignore, and far more costly than anyone in that room had been willing to imagine. The analyst's voice broke the silence first, quieter than before, almost uncertain. "This framework, it looks familiar." And that was when Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket. Not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate, pulling out a thin, creased badge that had seen better days, the edges softened from years of being carried and forgotten. He set it gently on the table, not sliding it, not forcing attention, just placing it where the light could catch the faded lettering. And one of the executives leaned in, squinting, then freezing as recognition hit. "Read. Systems Architecture Division," he read under his breath, and the room shifted all over again, sharper this time, heavier. Daniel's eyes dropped to the badge, then lifted slowly back to Marcus, searching, recalculating, and Marcus finally met him without restraint. "I built the original model," he said, calm, steady, no pride in it, just truth, before it was modified. A long silence followed, the kind that carried weight, because now the mistake was not theoretical anymore. It had a source, a history, a decision point. And Daniel's grip on the pen loosened just enough for it to roll slightly across the table, his control slipping in the smallest, most telling way, as the realization settled in that the man he dismissed was the one person in the room who had understood everything from the very beginning. No one spoke as the numbers on the screen settled into a final projection, the red margin holding steady like a quiet verdict, and Daniel remained seated, his posture no longer commanding but still, the weight of the room pressing in from every direction as the same executives who laughed minutes ago now avoided his eyes, flipping pages, whispering, recalculating their own positions. Marcus picked up his badge without a word and slipped it back into his pocket, then reached for his toolbox. The metal handle clicking softly in the silence. And as he turned to leave, Daniel finally found his voice, lower now, stripped of certainty. "Mr. Reed, wait." But Marcus did not stop right away, only pausing for a brief second before continuing toward the door, because the truth had already done its work, and sometimes the loudest answer was the one that did not need to be said at all.